Hello everybody, welcome to Eating Peace today. I'm back from my wild adventures in northern Canada, where last week's video I made was in a hotel room. And it was wonderful because I recalled being in a hotel room, stuffing my face with food and feeling so lonely and awful many, many years ago. One thing I thought of sharing this week was some ideas and thoughts for how to work with guilt and shame. Interestingly, I talk about feelings quite a bit. Feelings, this emotional eating experience where we're eating out of a drive for seeking something else besides actual food. That's where the imbalance comes and the suffering, the dreadful difficulty of desiring food when you don't actually need it in your body for fuel. You want something though. So there's a deep craving inside and trying to match up what it is. So I talk a lot about feelings and how, in a general sense, these three umbrella areas, powerlessness, fear, and emptiness, drive a desire, like at an emotional or existential level or spiritual level, if you want to call it that. But they drive an urge for food and eating because food is so comforting and food grounds you and food, has certain benefits or feels to it that change your experience of the emotion, but only temporarily. And then often what comes in when you do choose to eat, or even almost feel like it's not a choice, you're just overwhelmed, although I would question if it's not a choice, because nobody's handcuffing you. But what happens? You feel shame and guilt. You feel so awful, so condemning of yourself when you do go ahead and eat. So I thought I would speak today. Some people have written me lately and some one-on-one clients. We've done some interesting solo sessions with great shame and guilt and the desire to get rid of it. So let's just look at that as a basic principle in the first place, the desire to get rid of shame and guilt. Because what I notice is, in reality, they exist. Shame and guilt exist. So maybe they have an important message. Maybe they have a function. It's not up to us. We're not running things here, right? When it comes to feelings, maybe they are saying something or inviting us to something extremely important. Now, I know you can get stuck, deeply stuck in a terrible cycle of feeling ashamed of yourself, feeling that you are bad rather than that you've done something bad. And it's a really deeply debilitating experience, severe depression, a feeling of inadequacy or like you can't move or you'll never change, never, I'm always this way, kind of very grand, big, wide statements, and seeing images of all the times and all the years you've had trouble with food or eating or some sort of compulsive impulse to do damage to yourself, or it's winding up doing damage to yourself. So let's just look. If first we just took a deep breath and looked at the experience of doing something that seems to be harmful to another person, to ourselves, the experience of shame, inadequacy, guilt. If it's there for some important reason with a message, I know it doesn't feel good, but what could that be? Often it's what I just said. It's like it's inviting you to answer the question, what has been hurt? What boundaries have been crossed? What's been violated in my own integrity, in my own sense of what feels right and peaceful and kind of like walking a middle path, not extreme. And then when I see that and I look at it, for example, let's just take overeating. If anyone saw, if there was a hidden camera in the kitchen on those days when I was binging and we had a movie of me eating and eating and eating, it would look so embarrassing to me at the time, shameful. But if I didn't look at it through the lens of shame and I looked instead and I just really watched with compassion, what is that person doing? She is desperate. She is feeling so empty. She's feeling like there's no other option except for eating. That's the way her emotions are going to be handled. The thing is, when you have shame and guilt and the attack thoughts come in, you start to lose, like, what could be going on here? An open-ended question that says, what's happening for this person? What else is going on that she would be driven? What is in her mind? What is in that person's thoughts? It's kind of funny speaking of yourself in the third person, but it can help get a little bit of detachment, right? If you were just watching yourself, oh, what did she do? What was happening there? What is going on? And see what the story is. See what the beliefs are that are running. See what the thoughts are. I mean, kind of finding these, they almost go by like a ghost thought. They're as quick as, I remember once hearing, I don't know if it's really true, that they would flash pictures of food on TV screens so quickly, or the movie screens in the theater that were of food and candy and popcorn or whatever was going on there, that made everyone want to go get it, and they weren't sure why. It's because they just saw such a quick flash of this thing on a screen that they didn't register consciously, but in their mind they logged, because the mind is very, very fast. Something happened. I don't know if that's really true, but I do know it's true that we're doing that to ourselves. The speed of a thought flashing on the mind, especially an alarm thought. Alarm, I'm scared about whatever it is. One thing that can be very helpful, because it can be really, really overwhelming at how much you feel like is unresolved or unanswered or not settled within based on your life experience, is to just take, I've said this before, 5 moments in your life. Just simply take 5 terribly difficult situations. Things that when you think about, go all the way back to your childhood. If they're all in your childhood, that's okay. Sometimes those foundational experiences are the ones that are driving us for the next 30 years, 40 years. So find 5 difficult experiences. Often these are exchanges with other human beings, but sometimes they aren't. Sometimes some traumatic thing happened that really frightened you. It had to do with people, but it also might have had to do with death and dying or disease or violence or some sort of difficulty. Something you were afraid of. Something scared you. Something alarmed you. You became against that thing in reality. And we know we're looking at where our arguments are with reality. Where are my arguments with what is? If I am overeating when I'm not hungry, I am definitely arguing with something in reality. And I love Byron Katie's little saying, if you argue with reality, you will lose, but only 100% of the time. So it might feel a little bit better to comfort yourself with food, or it's doing something to help you get grounded and take a deep breath, and it feels like it. But ultimately it's very temporary, and then you're going to bring in guilt and shame. So let's just take care of this. Looking at guilt and shame, instead of trying to get rid of it and fix it and never have it, what is the message that it's bringing? Maybe you have some sort of experience of those memories, so you can to make it more specific, looking at guilt and shame. If you don't want to just look at what you've been frightened of, look at moments, 5 moments in time, or 5 things you feel ashamed of, and write those down. I know it's kind of odd. We don't want to look at those. It'd be better to put those away in a cave, right? Never open the cave again. But if there's no requirement for any cave, if you're looking and you expose yourself and you're vulnerable, with the right amount of support, which you can get from the inside of yourself, you have an equal amount or greater ability to love yourself with compassion as you do to attack yourself with shameful thoughts. So these shameful thoughts are just trying the best they can to get your attention. Best they can. And they just have a deep question for you. What has been hurt? What are you afraid of? Where do you feel like you've been violated or hurt by something in reality? Because identifying these things are going to be incredibly powerful. And then the next step, when you just get one at a time, you You've written down 5 things. You just take one, because you're going to take it slow and just move through it step by step. We don't have to take care of all of it at once. Write it down. Find a facilitator of the work. Write that Judge Your Neighbor worksheet where you're going to get your judgments and thoughts down on paper about that situation that felt so difficult. See what else was going on. Don't lean into it as if it's all me and I'm all terrible or all something else. You just notice if you have those kinds of thoughts, then this is a good thing to do the work on. What do you feel most ashamed of? And then let's see what was happening there. Is really looking and seeing with love and compassion and an open mind. You know, as if you're watching a human being who's doing that behavior over there. And you see, yeah, that's a little off behavior. She is really upset about something. I mean, I could say that now, even though I'd probably go have this little cringe inside if I did see a movie of myself in my 20s on a binge. I thought it was so isolated and secret and hiding, that feeling. But you know, what's going on? There's like a huge disconnect for that young woman that I was, a huge disconnect with what was in my integrity and what I was desperately feeling in need of and what I felt scared to. A real trap, you know. I can't ask for what I want. I can't ask for what I need. Too ashamed, too closed in, too stuck. So I'm letting the message that shame or guilt has for me just overwhelm the entire thing and become like a shutdown so that it's trapped and stuck. So let's look at guilt and shame as if it's not so bad. I know it's kind of funny. It's gotten a really bad rap, you know. We got to undo it all and make sure no one ever feels guilty or ashamed. It's impossible. So just noticing, you know, it's got an important message. It's going to help you become aware of something very, very important. And you can practice this through seeing more clearly. If you're not even sure and you feel very confused, you can even just say, all right, shame and guilt, I am open to seeing why you're visiting me so often. What's happening here? What's going on? You know, even just starting with your compulsions, like this urge to overeat. What is happening? What are all the emotions in that moment? What happened earlier before that feels really frightening or sad or difficult or hurtful? Hurt. Hurt is a very important key place to spend time looking when it comes to guilt or shame. Where have I felt hurt and where have I thought I'm hurting someone or something else? And what would be going on in that situation? All right. Writing these things down, beginning to journal, maybe even working with somebody else, a close friend, a companion, an advisor, somebody that you can talk to that can listen to you without making suggestions to fix it. Somebody actually who would be open to this. You can even tell them, if they've never heard of this idea before, I'm exploring guilt and shame and the message, and I'm not trying to get rid of it. I actually want it to stay here until I get the message, because that's what it's doing already. The shame is going to stick around until you understand what it has to say, until you hear it. At least I noticed that was certainly true for me. So you can even, maybe shame has a shape and it's like a person. See if it's talking, what it has to say to you. It could be something extremely important that you haven't been willing to hear. Very important to listen to. Wonderful, wonderful things can come out of this without all the resistance to shame. So we're ending the argument and we're making a discussion instead. Contact, back and forth. Opening up the flow again so it's free flowing, not stuck. All right, let me know how it goes.